We're going to start, I think, with some background, with me discussing some background. And then we will get into the material we did, or you did for today, and we'll talk about it. But even before we do that, I want to go over some pronunciation matters or issues. But before I begin essentially a lecture, let me ask, because your response may totally obviate the need for a lecture. How many of you have had a course in the history of the English language? One. Okay. That's kind of what I expected. No, that's fine. I got to remember I'm in a rocking chair, and I have to remember not to rock because the other camera, computer I'm recording on, it's going to make people seasick. Okay, that's fine. So because of that, I want to start by share screen, by putting up something on the screen that I uploaded to the content section, Old English materials or something like that a week or so ago. And I'm actually going to pull up 2 or 3 things, not all at once, but eventually. Okay, hold on. This is not working over here, so not that one, that one. Give me just a second because I'm doing this with 2 hands. It should be up on this computer. Chronology, find your pictures. Where is it? I thought I had everything pulled up that I needed to. There we go. Now do share screen, and it's there. Okay. So, bit of background. Well, let me just essentially start at the beginning. The English language is an Indo-European language. Okay, all right. The Indo-Europeans were originally small group. Can you see what I've got pulled up on the screen? Okay. Was originally a small group of people that originated, we're not exactly sure where, but there are a couple of, about 3 really good hypotheses for where this group of people originally came from. Let me put it that way, okay? And one of them is, one of those areas is in the picture or the map that I just brought up, is from this area right in here between the Black and Caspian Seas, okay, and kind of north of that area in the southern steppes of Russia, right? This is called the Kurgan Hypothesis, K-U-R-G-A-N. It's all in these notes that you have. It's called the Kurgan Hypothesis. This was first proposed by a scholar named Maria Gimbutas back in the late 1950s, right? And a kurgan is a burial mound. And she bases it upon archaeological evidence, she bases it upon linguistic evidence, and she bases it upon mythological evidence. That is, evidence that we can derive of the cultures of these people based upon the myths that they all share. to some extent. That is, there are certain ideas, certain tropes that show up in the myths of the people that descend from this original postulated Proto-Indo-European group. And because of that, because they all have these similarities, we kind of work our way back up the so-called genealogical tree to the original parents or ancestors. Okay, so you got the Kurgan hypothesis, which places them somewhere in the southern steppes of Russia, north in between Black and Caspian Seas. Okay, we're not going to go into all of this. This is material for another class, but sometime 4000 BC, maybe a little bit earlier, 5000 BC, this group starts to break up. It starts to spread, okay? And the way they spread, it doesn't, it's not like dropping a glass and just, the glass just shatters in all directions all at once. No, for some reason, as you can see with it moves, with the second slide, it starts to go off to the northwest, starts to go off to the west, starts to go off to the east, and slowly down to the southeast, okay? And it gradually disperses. I mean, this middle slide here is showing you the period, period from roughly 4500 to 2500 BC, and then the next one, 2500 to 1800 BC, where you really start to see, various groupings. For example, over here in the east, in this area, that becomes the Iranic speakers, modern day Iran, Persians, etc. Okay. Over in the west, you get the Balto-Slavic group. Farther west of that, you get the Germanic group, etc., etc. And they eventually they break out into, or they devolve, if you want, into all the linguistic groups that we know today as the various Indo-European languages. So all the languages of modern day, for example, India, Punjabi, Hindi, Bengali, etc. The various indigenous, we would say, indigenous languages of Russia, okay? All the Slavic languages. All the Germanic languages, which is going to be important for us because that's what English is, entirely a Germanic language with some Latin influence thrown in. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, right? So this is one of today really one of the two major hypotheses. The other major hypothesis is that this group of individuals, this group of speakers of a now totally dead language. There are no surviving artifacts. There's nothing left written of this language. Okay. The other major hypothesis for its homeland is what's called the Anatolian Hypothesis, and that is that what is today modern day Turkey was the original homeland. Right, and it makes the Indo-Europeans, or it takes the Indo-Europeans back to about 7000 BC and says that the migrations that would become the various sublinguistic groups that we just discussed, Italic and Greek and Germanic, et cetera, that those began around 7000 BC. Now, one of the big differences between the two hypotheses is not only the location, but the reason for the dispersal, the reason for why they moved out of their original homeland. The Gimbutas theory, or the Kurgan hypothesis, is that these people were pastoral nomads, right? We're pretty sure they invented the wheel, because the earliest wheels in human existence are found primarily in this area, okay? In fact, they probably not only invented the wheel, they probably invented the next thing that you invent after you make the wheel, the cart. Something, put wheels on, load stuff, and you can move, okay? They're probably the ones who domesticated the horse, etc. but they were nomads. They moved from one area to another. They were also somewhat militaristic, okay? In the Anatolian hypothesis, they start to spread out, not because they're nomads, but because of population growth. They got to be too big for this one area, right? But they, even from here, they kind of move out in the same directions and in the same manner as in the earlier, as in the Gimbuddhist hypothesis. Some move off to the north, south, east, west, etc., and then become the various linguistic groups, again, that we know of today, okay? So here's another kind of a modification of the Anatolian hypothesis. It just moves the location farther east into what is modern day Armenia. So it's not the Anatolian, it's the Armenian hypothesis. And you have the movement out from there, first going down into modern day Iran, then over into India, then over here. You've got this word, I don't know if you can read it or not, it says Tokaria. This is in modern day, the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, right? Ask me at another time. It's very, very interesting because there were a group of speakers over here whose language was, for example, like closer to German than to the Iranic and Indian speakers. And very oddly enough, they dressed in clothing that would make them look comfortable in Glasgow, Scotland. I mean, they wore plaid, bright, because the clothing survives. We've got burials of these people. Anyways, and then over into this group, right? Russia, Germanic, et cetera, okay? So, Old English is a variant of the Germanic group. Old English comes from the Germanic group, okay? I'm gonna skip through a lot of this and go on to talk about the Germanic languages. So, you got 7 characteristics of Germanic languages. These notes that I have up here, these are notes I use for my history of the English language course. All the Germanic languages, okay? Modern day German, the Nordic languages, languages of Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, English, etc. Gothic, which no longer survives, but was around kind of at the beginning, at least, of the Old English period. The last native Gothic speaker died around 1700. Anyways, all the Germanic languages have these 7 characteristics, okay? And what's interesting about these 7 characteristics is these tend to be unique to the Germanic languages. That is, these aren't shared by the other Indo-European languages, right? It's very odd. We don't know why the Germanic languages, or what's called Proto-Germanic, the earliest form of Germanic, we don't know why it developed these things, okay? It used to be thought that Proto-Germanic was possibly the first of the Indo-European languages that broke away. That is, the speakers who developed this were the first ones that broke out of the group, and that therefore these characteristics developed that we don't see in any of the other languages. Anyways, so those 7 characteristics: shared, common, distinctive vocabulary. That is, words that are common, that are cognate, brother and sister, in all the Germanic languages, for which there are no cognates, there are no relatives in the other Germanic, in the other Indo-European languages. For example, the word for God. There are other words for God. For example, theos in Greek, okay? Deus in Latin. But those aren't related to the English word God. They're not cognate to. They mean the same thing, but there's There's nothing that ties them together relationally, all right? So that's just one example of a word in English for which, you know, there's no related word in the other languages. The other languages develop their own words for God, etc., that are related, and we could talk about that at a later point, okay? Two-tense verb system. What are the two tenses, the real tenses, let's say, in modern English? Past and present. That's really it. Strictly speaking, literally speaking, we don't have a future tense in verbs. How do we, let's deal with past. So if yesterday you were talking with somebody, you would say, yesterday I talked, right? So we add that, in that particular kind of verb, we add that ed ending. That's that preterite tense, the dental suffix that I was talking about 2 weeks ago, okay? If it was a strong verb like swim, we would say, you know, today I swam, I am swimming today, or I will swim today, or yesterday I swam, okay? But tomorrow I will swim. Tomorrow I will talk. In modern English, in order to represent futurity, we have to add what's called a modal auxiliary to every verb, right? So we have to have two verbs in order to make that occur. In all the other Indo-European languages, you don't have to do that. The verb will take an ending, right? The verb will take a conjugation and inflection that will indicate that futurity. Germanic doesn't. We don't know why. One theory that's been proposed, and nobody, I want to be careful how I put this. Nobody necessarily really seriously accepts it. I mean, you won't see this, you know, argued in linguistics journals or philological journals and such. But a theory that's been proposed is that Germanic languages don't have a future tense because of Germanic ideology, or the Germanic mythology, if you want, the Germanic mentality. Well, why would that be the case? Well, if you know anything about Germanic mythology, what does the future hold for humanity? Anybody know what Ragnarok is? Sarah, what's Ragnarok?
Okay. Ragnarok is like their own sort of apocalypse. So everything is destroyed.
It's the you know, the way Richard Wagner put it in his Ring cycle, it's the Götterdämmerung. It's the twilight of the gods. Well, according to Ragnarok, in most versions of the myth, Ragnarok is the literal end of the world, the apocalypse, as you put it, where who wins? This is why, you know, the theory kind of has some resonance. The forces of evil, chaos, and darkness win. Thor, Odin, Frigg, Freya, Heimdall, pick all the people out of Thor movies, you know, the whole 9 yards. They all die. Who wins? Loki? Surt? The frost giants? The elves? The Arkneas? All the forces of chaos win. Turn out the lights, story's over. So there's no future. There's mentally looking forward, there's nothing to look forward to. Even if you're a warrior and you're dying on the battlefield and you're thinking, I'm going to go to Valhalla. Well, Valhalla, which literally means the hall of the dead, the hall of the slaughtered, Valhalla is only good until Ragnarok. Because when Ragnarok comes, all the dead soldiers, all the dead warriors come out of Valhalla to fight alongside Thor and Odin, etc., against the forces of darkness and evil and such, and they die again. They lose again, essentially. All right? So, not a lot to look forward to in that kind of mentality. So maybe that's why they only look at the past and present. And another interesting thing about this, the two-tense verb system, is, a couple of weeks ago when I talked about, how we form the past tense, for example, strong verbs, you've got that vowel change. Swim, swim, swum. Swim, present tense, when you make that word in your mouth is rather tense. The I in swim, it's called a front vowel, okay? It's a front tense vowel. So your mouth is kind of tense when you go I, okay? When you make the aw in swam, swim, swam, your mouth opens up. It's a little less tense, okay? The vowel's formed in the center of the mouth, and I'm going to put up what's called a vowel triangle later, and we're going to talk about pronunciation and such, okay? And then swum. Swum is a high back vowel, that is, it's formed in the back of the mouth, and the mouth is very loose, it's very relaxed, okay? Swim is present tense. The mouth is tense. Why? Again, according to this theory, well, the present is kind of a tense time, right? I mean, we're in 2020. How could it get more tense than everything we've seen thrown at us this year, okay? The past, yesterday, 2019, 2014, 2010, 2010 can't harm you today, can it? 2014 can't harm you today. Yesterday can't harm you today. And if you go even farther past, the swim, swam, swum, the farther back in the past you go, the farther away danger is. And thus the mouth gets more relaxed, the body gets more relaxed. But when you're dealing with the present, you have to be armed, locked and loaded, so to speak, okay? It's just the possible theory that's been given out. Okay, so what else? We've talked about this a little bit. Weak verbs, what are today, I always get these mixed up, what are today called regular verbs, okay, use a dental suffix for preterite tense. Preterite's just fancy word for past, okay? So weak verbs use a dental suffix for preterite tense. Now, bear in mind that preterite tense might also involve a vowel change. Think, we don't say thinked, we say think, thought. So you have that vowel change, but the kicker, the most important thing is you get that introduction of the t sound, right? Only happens in Germanic. Doesn't happen in any other Indo-European languages, okay? So weak verbs use a dental suffix for preterite tense, either a final t sound or a final d sound. Usually it's the d sound or ed in poetry. You got to make the line scan, so you say, walk ed kind of a thing, okay? What else? Proto-Germanic had a system of weak and strong adjectives. So if you got weak and strong verbs, we're going to have weak and strong adjectives, all right? Why? No idea. We don't know the reasons why for any of this, okay? It just did. And all the terminology, by the way, comes from Jacob Grimm, the same Grimm of the Grimm's fairy tales. He and his brother walked around, collected fairy tales. Well, Grimm was also a philologist, and he looked into the origins of the Germanic languages and Indo-European and such, okay? So, weak and strong adjectives. How do you know if an adjective is weak or strong? Well, I mean, if you're like J.R. Tolkien and you are blessed with the gift of language, okay? He read something like 20, 21, and he could speak 14 languages, if I remember correctly, He had the language facility in his mind, born with it, right? He could probably recognize the easy way for us to know whether or not an adjective is weak or strong is what precedes it. If it has a demonstrative pronoun or definite article or possessive pronoun in front of it, okay, it's weak. That's it. Now, it will decline. That is, it will have an inflectional ending that will match the noun it modifies. If the noun is genitive masculine, is genitive singular masculine. The adjective is also going to be genitive singular masculine. And the definite article or demonstrative pronoun in front of it is also going to be genitive singular and masculine. Okay? Adjectives modify their nouns and agree with their nouns in case, number, and gender all the time. All right? You're going to see maybe, however, in, what was it? The parsing I did and put up for you to compare yours to, there was one instance where there's something followed by a dative, and if I remember right, the adjective was singular and the noun was plural, but that's because the adjective is acting like a plural even though it's not literally a plural. We'll talk about that later, maybe. Okay, so you got examples there. What else? Germanic languages have first syllable stress. Latin is second syllable, Greek is second syllable, Russian, I'm pretty sure, is second syllable. Most of the other Indo-European languages don't emphasize the first syllable, they emphasize the second syllable. Okay? Germanic languages emphasize the first syllable. What that means, or what tends to happen as a result of that, is subsequent syllables gradually become less important. Okay? And in the Middle Ages, after the Old English period, we get what's called the leveling of inflections. That is, the inflections level off, they die off. One of the reasons for that is because people aren't emphasizing those syllables that come at the end of words. You probably had, well, maybe you did, I did, had grade school teachers who would jump on my case because I would say, I'm running out to the playground. Run in. Pronounce that final G, Theodore, kind of a thing. Well, because that final ing isn't emphasized, we tend to drop off those final. That's why we have final E's on most of our words today, or many of our words. Because what was originally there, that inflection, got dropped off because we weren't emphasizing that sound. And even in Old English, you're going to see, when we have a final E, we don't go, trying to see if I can find a word right in front of me. We don't say bestendeth. We say bestendeth, and it's just the okay? But eventually that's going to level out to so it'll be to is the default schwa sound in the mouth, okay? And then it'll just drop off eventually, right? So first syllable stress. And you've got some examples there. German tragen, wissen, sprechen. But notice this one here, it's not beginnen, it's beginnen. Why? Because this be is just a little affix that's unimportant. Just like if you noticed in your book, I think it is in the beginning English section, Marsden says, whenever you have a word that begins with ya, where it's clear that it's a prefix, you don't emphasize that at all. You don't look for that. when you're going back to the glossary. Okay, you look for the root, main form of the word, etc. Okay. Vowel shifts we're not going to talk about, other than, these are two of the other characteristics. Okay, so vowel shift from Proto-Indo-European to Proto-Germanic, and then this is the big one right here, what's called the first sound shift, or Grimm's law. Okay, and I don't want to spend real long on that, but it is important, and it will help you later in translating and things like that. Let me ask this question. What other foreign languages have you studied? Anybody? Anybody study German? No. French? Spanish? Italian? Okay. Okay, it works with, Spanish too. What is the name? No, it can't do that. The Lord's Prayer that I included in the syllabus. Anybody know what the Latin is for that? What that's called in Latin? And you don't have to pronounce it according to classical Latin. The Pater Noster, Pater Noster. Nostra, like Casa Nostra, our house. Nostra means our. Pater, Father. Why? Because it begins. Our Father, or Father Ure. All right? Okay? But why does that begin with a P where English has an F? Doesn't make sense. It's because of this. In the other Indo-European languages, okay, you have certain sounds that in Germanic, they shift. They become other sounds. And this occurs in 3 steps, right? And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm just going to go over kind of quickly. So the first one, and terminology we're not going to talk about. The first one deals with sounds that aren't in the English language at all anymore. But it's if you're looking at this at the chart, number 1, it says PIE, which stands for Proto-Indo-European. Aspirated voice stops become eventually Proto-Germanic unaspirated. Aspirated just means voiced, and unaspirated means unvoiced. You go with a sound, okay? So the BH there within virgules, that just means a B with a heavy breathing sound after it, okay? So Proto-Indo-European, Brater, becomes brother. And we know that this sound was there because it survives in a lot of other Indo-European sounds. It shows up, for example, in Sanskrit, where it's actually even spelled with the BH, okay? So skip some of those, go down to the next one, because this is where you'll recognize things. What's the thing at the end of your leg that you put shoes on? Foot. What do you go to? Who do you go to when you go to a foot doctor? What's that person called? A podiatrist. Why don't we call him a footiatrist? Well, the pod comes from ped. You see the signs on the street, pedestrian with a line through it. No pedestrians. It means no walking. So, pod, in Latin becomes foot in English. What's that constellation in the sky that supposedly looks like a creature that swims in streams and oceans? Pisces. But we don't call them Pisces. What do we call them in English? Fish. So f, all right? So ped, foot, pisc, fish, all right? What else? Latin, or Spanish, uno, dos, tres, three, t to th, right? You have heart problems, what kind of doctor you to go see? Cardiologist. You don't see a heartiologist, you see a cardiologist. And yet we call that a heart, okay? Cared, card, heart, okay? Interestingly, the next one on the thing, you know, you got Proto-Indo-European, star, that means this doesn't actually survive, it's reconstructed. Kel, modern English, hell. You know what other word we get from kel? Cell, cellar, holster. They're all related. It essentially means a place or thing of concealment. Okay, so you get, you know, these Proto-Germanic, what are called voiceless stops, p, t, and k, okay, become Proto-Germanic voiceless fricatives. So p becomes f, t becomes f, okay, and k becomes h. For example, I don't know if you can't see them because I got the background up. Up on this bookcase behind me, I've got several things that you wear on your head. Hat. But what's another word for that? Well, take the back. What else do you call your head? You every now and then you'll read something and it will say something about kappa P. C-A-P-A-P-I-E-D. That means head to foot. All right? So cap, hat. It still works. The last one. Proto-Indo-European voice stops become, was that me? Become Proto-Germanic voiceless stops. So b becomes p, d becomes t, and g becomes k. Just, you know, d becomes t. Duo is what? Two, right? Dent, these things, becomes tooth, right? So those are the 7 characteristics of the Germanic languages, right? And then you've got, in these notes, a comparison of the Paternoster in Gothic, and you got, you know, approximately 4th century AD, Old Saxon, around 840 AD, Old English, 9th century, and Alemannish from about 1000 AD. And you could go through and you could compare those and start to see similarities between them. I mean, there's going to be differences, obviously, right? So, skip on from there and look briefly at no, you don't need to look at that one. At this Germanic language tree. This will be a little bit helpful, possibly. Okay? So you start with Proto-Indo-European. It gives us Proto-Germanic. Proto-Germanic survives or exists, divides, however you want to put it, into 3 branches. These are geographical branches: east, north, and west. Okay. For purposes of us, for our purposes, for this class, the west branch is the most important because that's the one that deals with Old English. Okay. And I don't have Old English on this chart. I've changed it a bit over the years. So you have the West, you've got Anglo-Frisian and Netherlandic German. Anglo-Frisian, English, and Frisian. The Anglo there means Angol in terms of a reference to a geographical area of what is today northern Germany / Denmark. Okay? And it's Anglo-Frisian because it gives us both English and modern day Frisian. Modern day Frisian is a language spoken on the northwest coast of Europe, kind of between the Netherlands and Germany, right? in what are called the Frisian Islands. If you can read Old English, you can pick up a text of Old Frisian and read it, because Old English, to some extent, derives partially from that. All right, we'll talk about that in a minute. The other Germanic, the main Germanic that you might be aware of, like modern Germany, that comes from Netherlandic Germanic, right? And that divides into high and low. High and low, that's geography, topography. High means the Alps. Low means, is also called Plattdeutsch, flat Germany, lowland Germany, northern Germany, right? And you get Old Saxon, which gives us modern Low German, Old Low Franconian, which gives us the modern Dutch, Flemish, Afrikaans, etc. Okay. Old Norse comes from the northern branch. That's the language of the Vikings. Okay, really cool. Divides into two branches, west and east. Right, and then the east branch breaks off from Proto-Germanic, gives us Gothic, Vandalic, Burgundian, Visigothic, and Ostrogothic. Very, very little survives of the eastern branch languages. In terms of Vandalic and Burgundian, primarily names of people, place names, and we do have some laws. No literature per se. We do have some Gothic, promise. We do have some Gothic. We've got portions of the Bible in Gothic, for example, because there was a Gothic bishop in the 5th century who translated peaceful parts of the Bible because he was trying to, pacify the Gothic people that he was missionizing, proselytizing to. He didn't need to make them more warlike because they were already pretty warlike. Okay. Let's see here. I don't think we need to do anything on that. Okay. Let me change something. Stop the sharing. Any questions so far? I know that's a lot of material in not much time. But it's all what's called prologamy and background too. Okay, about the somebody, and I don't know who it is. It gives me an email address. Sorry. The link for the Zoom, because I had to find it too. It's on one of the first announcements for the class, and for every week, go to that announcement. You'll just have to keep loading them until they all load. It was before the first day of class, I believe, and go down, and it says something like, follow this link to the class. I'm going to see if I can pull it up real quickly right now. I may not be able to because I may not have it set. No, I don't.
It was me. I was the problem child.
Oh, that's okay. It's just, I'm just trying to see if I can find that page. And I can't. Yes, there it is. Hold on just 1 second. George, go away. Okay, now go back to Zoom. So it's on it's an announcement from August 17th. It's this announcement. I also send it as an email, and you click on this link right here, and that'll bring you to the class. Okay, so I want to stop that. I want to go to here. So stop that share and pull this one up. So any questions so far? Where are those notes? There they are. Where's my Zoom? Hold on just 1 second. I had to send one of my kids a text to come get the cat. I put a big board over my chair, and it's too much to have to get up and move. Is that the one I want? Yeah. Okay, so do you see now a set of notes that say history of the Anglo-Saxon period? Okay. I might pull up another page too. My daughter's also getting the dogs. Come on, dogs. Come on out. So, a bit of background for the history of the period. I'm gonna skip the Caesar and all that kind of stuff. What we're really interested in is Anglo-Saxon. So Caesar comes in, he annexes. Latin-speaking people start to settle in Britain, right? Britain's originally inhabited. I should say originally. Britain is inhabited from 1700 BC, sometime in that time frame, is inhabited by Celtic-speaking people, right? Celts are one of the Indo-European language groups. Who the people were living in Britain prior to the Celts, who, for example, made Stonehenge, we don't really know. I mean, we don't really know what their linguistic group was. They're probably, the odds are very great against them being Indo-Europeans, simply because Stonehenge was built too early for it to have been built by Indo-European speakers. If the theories about the homeland, the dispersal of the Proto-Indo-European peoples are within the ballpark, it's too early, okay? So, the Celts are there, the Romans come in, so the Celts are speaking Celtic, the Romans come in, the Romans bring Latin, the Romans also probably by 100 AD bring, how do I want to call this? Early Christianity. I can't think of another way to put it. Not proto-Christianity, because it's Christianity, but they bring Christianity because we know Christianity is in Britain, definitely by the 2nd century, because there was a persecution, and the first known persecuted British, later saint, is St. Alban, who dates from 150 to 200 AD, okay? It's a town that originally has a Roman name, Verulamium, changed to his name, St. Albans, which is just outside London and such, okay? So there's Christianity there, it spread, it moves over into Wales. St. David of Wales is early 5th century, I believe, and such, okay? So you have this, mixture of Celtic religions, Roman paganism and Christianity, right? The Romans come in and they do something nobody has ever seen before. They build stuff out of stone. They build roads out of stone. They build paved roads, essentially. There's going to be a passage in Beowulf. It's pretty interesting because it's a glaring anachronism, where we read about the warriors riding back from Grendel's mere, where Grendel has taken, those that what's left of them, that he's killed to eat. And after Beowulf pulls his arm off, they're riding back from Grendel's mere, and the poet talks about the stone paved road. Well, if the area that Beowulf is set in is really supposed to be set in that area, there were no stone paved roads because the Romans never reached that far north. And the Germanic peoples didn't build paved roads. So that's a pretty glaring anachronism, because it shows that the poet is putting his modern understanding of road technology into something that could not have happened. Okay? Anyways, so the Romans are there for roughly 450 years in Britain, right? They've got Britain divided up, garrisons, the whole 9 yards. You know, they build Hadrian's Wall to keep the Picts and Scots out from the north, because they were scary and they couldn't conquer them, and so they built a big wall. And this isn't like our wall on the southern border. This wall is like 3 yards thick. It's got houses built into it, ramparts that men can walk, 4 or 5 abreast on top, and parts of it are 20 feet tall. I mean, this is armored, fortified wall from the North Sea to the Irish Sea. It goes all the way across England, okay, Britain. So, 410 AD, Alaric the Hun and his forces sack Rome. Pretty big deal. Why? Well, what was Rome called at the time? It still is. Not euphemistically, what's the word I want? Metaphorically. It's the eternal city. Well, by the time they finish 3 days of sacking, it's not so eternal anymore. I mean, people run and scatter and it gets emptied, all right? So in preparation for the sacking of Rome, and partially as a result of the sacking of Rome, Roman emperor withdraws the garrisons from Britain. Now that happens in 410. What does nature abhor, we are told? Anybody know? A vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. Why? What does a vacuum create? It creates a sucking, right? So what happens when all of those soldiers, all of those warriors, those garrisons leave Britain? There's a power vacuum. I mean, the reason they're there is to protect Roman interests and stuff. Well, apparently Rome no longer cares. So Rome leaves, and now you have all these people, some of whom are thoroughly Roman, some of whom are kind of Romano-Celtic, okay? But bear in mind, Rome's been there longer than we've been a country, okay? So you have the natives, so to speak, left. Well, why did Hadrian build the wall in the first place? To keep the Picts out. So when Rome leaves, the Picts start coming over the wall. That is, the people in northern England and farther south start getting attacked, okay? Now, everything I'm going to say from essentially here on, at least up through Bede, is all based upon Bede. Bede, writer who lived in the 7th century to the early 8th century, was a polyglot who knew everything. It's from him that we get our dating system. Whether you use BC, BCE, AD, CE, it's whatever the abbreviation you use, it's still using at the center point one event, the birth of Christ. Whether you call it the Common Era and you leave Christ out, or you call it Anno Domini, in the year of the Lord, it's still figured around that one date. That comes from Bede. Okay. Anyways, so Bede wrote this book, 731, The Ecclesiastical History of the English-Speaking People, or the Ecclesiastical History of the English People, if you want. Okay. And Bede gives us the account of the invasion of the Anglo-Saxons, or as more modern scholars put it, the migration of the Anglo-Saxons. And what Bede tells us, and one of the ways he does this is he looks at evidence. He doesn't just make stuff up. He tries to find proof. For example, he sends to Rome and he gets copies of letters in the Vatican. He gets copies of histories. He looks at previous histories that have been written and such. He's often called the first modern historian because he tries to get corroborating witness. He tries to get verification for what he's talking about, okay? He doesn't always get it, but he tries. Anyways, Bede tells us that around the year 449, 450, right, a Romano-British chieftain, a king, in the area of northeast England, today called East Anglia, area of Norfolk, for example, Norfolk, Peterborough, that area, a guy by the name of Vortigern, Vortigern. He's in here, he's in these notes somewhere. That he was just having a hard time with raiders, marauders coming down from the north. And so he sent a letter to Germanic tribes on the continent seeking assistance. He hired mercenaries. That's what he was doing. He was hiring mercenaries. These are the 5th century BC Blackwater contractors of the day, right? So he sends a letter, asks for their assistance, promises them pay and land if they'll come take care of the, marauding problem he has. And they agree. And Bede actually names 2 of the leaders. Guys' names are Hengist and Horsa, right? Anyways, they come, they fight the Picts, they, defeat them and such. And one of the things the Germanic tribes, the warriors and such, realize fairly quickly is, one, this land over here, because this is where they're initially talking about, is very fertile. Good growing land. But notice what else, okay? The Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, the people that come over to help Vortigern with this problem, they're coming from this area. If we were to put this on a globe or on a map, this latitude is quite a bit farther north. Shorter growing season, longer, colder winters, more mild, more temperate. So the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes start coming over, and what initially begins as they're coming over, they're being paid, some of them are going back, becomes they're coming over, they're being paid, and now they're staying. So they're taking, Vortigern agrees for some of them to give them land and such, but they also then start taking more land, right? Bear in mind, the people here, prior to the coming of the Anglo-Saxon Germanic tribes, the people here are Romano-Celtic, Romano-British. They're largely peaceful. They're largely farmers. They're not warriors. Why? Because they've had Roman legions protecting them for 400 years, right? So when the Germanic tribes start to come over, I'm gonna use language that describes 2 different scenarios, okay? When the Germanic tribes come over, they do one of 2 things. They either relatively peaceably migrate. That's one option. That's one theory. Or they invade. Now, up until about 30 years ago, most of the language of historians and Anglo-Saxon scholars was these were the Germanic invasions. Invasions are never peaceful. Invasions are always violent. They're always militaristic. Okay? And one of the reasons the language that was used to describe these was invasions was, one, that's the language Bede uses. Okay? And two, it's pretty clear that when the Germanic tribes come over, a lot of the people who lived in this area flee. I mean, they don't just assimilate to the Germanic peoples. They flee. They flee in three major directions. They flee north to what is today Scotland. They flee west to what is today Wales. And they flee south and southeast to what is today Cornwall. And I'm trying to see if I have another map here. No, I don't. And south across the channel to an area of modern day France that is still a province, and it still has a name that shows its relation to the Isle of Great Britain. Anybody know what that province is? Brittany. Little Britain. It's exactly what it is. It's Little Britain. Okay? And that's because the people who settled there came from Britain. And they brought their dialect language with them. And in the later Middle Ages, you will read, after Anglo-Saxon, you'll read about Breton lays. For example, the lays written by Marie de France. Well, that's because they were written in Bretonish, a variety of Celtic. All right? So, just because I'm old-fashioned and traditional, I tend to think it's more invasion. And there's another reason for that. The people that flee over here into Wales, the Welsh don't call themselves the Welsh. They don't call their land Wales. That's offensive to them. Anybody know why? What Welsh means or Wales means?
It means slave, doesn't it?
Very close. It comes from Old English, Welas, and it can mean slave, it can mean exile, and it can mean foreigner. So how'd you like to be called a foreigner in your own land? And the land is the land of foreigners. No, they're the Cymry, and they live in Cymru. I think that's it. I might have it the other. It might be the other way around. But they're the Cymru, and they live in Cymru. Okay, because the original language is Gaelic. Right, it's Welsh Gaelic. Right, up here you have Scots Gaelic. Down here you have Cornish Gaelic and Cornish. You have Manx Gaelic on the Isle of Man, etc. These are all forms of Celtic. Right, Indo-European. They go way, 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 way back. Okay, so the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes come in. And I wish I could blow up this map, but I can't. So where do they settle? Okay. Place names in modern day England tell us where they settle, or place names even in Anglo-Saxon England tell us where they settle. So down along here on the southern coast, if you go to England today and you visit modern day Hastings, southern coast, which is where supposedly, William the Conqueror landed. He didn't literally, but we'll talk about that later. This area is called Sussex. All right. You go farther west and you have Wessex. The area just around London, Essex. Notice what What is shared in all three of those names? Wessex, Essex, Sussex. The S-E-X has nothing to do with sex. It's a version or a form of sex. Saxons. Those over here were the West Saxons. Those down here were the South Saxons. Those around London were the East Saxons. Okay? In other words, the Saxons, the Saxon tribe from over here settled southern England. Southern Britain, sorry. I'm going to always go back and forth and say England when I shouldn't. It's not England until quite a bit later. Okay? This area here, modern day, it's still called this, East Anglia. That's where the Angles settled. Okay? This area was essentially West Anglia. So you had East Anglia, West Anglia. This is going to develop later into what's called Mercia. Mercia means essentially the marches, which is borderland, and it's the borderland between Anglia and the Welsh over here, okay? And then up here, you also had Angles. I mean, this is also part of the Angles. This becomes Northumbria later on, okay? So the Germanic tribes, what time is it? A little over an hour we come. So the Germanic tribes come in, they invade, they settle. What religion do they bring with them? Any guess? You could say none, or you could also say just good old Germanic paganism. You know, Thor, Odin, the whole 9 yards, right? So the whole Germanic pantheon, and possibly what I was talking about earlier, that you know, belief in Ragnarok, Valhalla. The reason I suggested that you read H.R. Ellis Davidson's The Gods and Myths of Northern Europe, because that's the ideology that these tribes would have brought with them. Okay? Christianity did not reach here until after Britain becomes Christian. Britain sends the missionaries who Christianize northern Germany. See, Rome only got as far as the Rhine River. And so Roman missionaries only got that far, right? They were kind of like, we don't even want to touch the Germans, because, I mean, they had a pretty bad reputation for the kinds of things they would do. Okay, so that's the Germanic invasions. So they bring Germanic paganism, and one of the things they do is they destroy the churches, they drive the Christians out, many of them, if not most or all of them. There's very little evidence in the archaeological record of kind of an active flourishing Christianity from 500 to 600 AD in Britain. Interestingly, it was just announced a week or so ago. I thought of posting it to the class, but didn't. Hadrian's Wall, you know, that goes across up here, right? There's a fort there called Vindolanda. It's this famous Roman fort, and the reason it's famous is because of all the stuff that's been discovered in archaeological excavations over the last 40 or 50 years. For example, Roman wax writing tablets. You know, we have paper to write on. They didn't. They had wax. So you get a stylus, you get a sheet of wax, put it in a little like wooden frame, warm it, smooth it, write what you want, and send that to somebody. That person would take it, read it, warm it, smooth the wax, write what they want, send it back. So that's how you would share letters if you didn't have papyrus and, you know, that kind of stuff. Well, anyways, they found these things in latrines, toilets, okay? just announced about a week and a half ago, a find from about 2 years ago is a Christian communion chalice from Vindolanda, from the Roman fort. It's broken into several pieces, but it's got all kinds of iconography on it. It's got like a fat, happy bishop and Cairo monogram and sheep and various other things. But it dates, interestingly, from about 400 to 450 AD, which is into the Roman period and just before the Anglo-Saxon period, right? So they come in. Christianity is kind of wiped out. And you've got some stuff here about the Christianization of Anglo-Saxon England, okay? 597, I'm going to try and go through the rest of this kind of quickly. 597, Pope Gregory the Great, one of you did an article about Alfred's translations, and I can't remember who it was, and mentioned Alfred's translation of the Cura Pastoralis, the pastoral care, and the preface that he wrote to it, and how Malcolm Godwin argues Alfred probably didn't do that himself. In fact, he might not have even commissioned it. It might be somebody else who did it entirely. Well, that's the Gregory who sends this Augustine, okay, to England, okay? And according to Bede, he does that because he meets an Anglian slave in the slave market in Rome. All right. So the Pope's, walking around in the slave market, and he sees these two children, according to Bede. And these children are these just, beautiful, fair-haired, blue-eyed, great complexion, blah, blah, blah. And through an interpreter, I guess, he asks them who they are, and they tell him that they are Angles, right? And Gregory puns on the name. He says, no, you're not Angles, you are Angelus, angels, right? Finds out they're pagan, they know nothing about Jesus. He asks them where they're from, okay? They tell him, if I remember correctly, they were captured in England, and sold into slavery, etc. So he decides at that moment he's going to send missionaries to the land of the Angles, okay? And he gets a deacon, raises him to the rank of priest, named Augustine. Augustine does not want to go. He is adamantly against it because he's heard stories about the Germanic tribes in Britain. They're bloodthirsty, marauding, killing, etc. But he does. He eventually goes, and he arrives in 597. And we're going to read part of this, I think, when we get to Cadman or the Bede section. And, Edwin, the first king, becomes a Christian. Now, Edwin is a king over here in Kent. His wife is the daughter of, just left my mind, the Frankish king who is Christian. Yeah, he's gone. Frankish king is Christian, so his wife's Christian, but Edwin isn't. And Edwin becomes a Christian, and Christianity spreads. I mean, it just kind of takes off like wildfire. And within 100, 150 years, everywhere from here to up here is fully Christianized. Now, bear in mind, Augustine comes down here in 597. I think in some other notes I have that I might pull up. While Augustine's doing that down here, Columba, St. Columba, is up here in the Highlands and the islands of Scotland. Iona has already become kind of this great, center of learning. And so you have Christianity also spreading, Celtic Christianity, spreading from the north down here. So Lindisfarne, which is right up here, Lindisfarne literally means holy island, okay, becomes Christianized from the Celts. St. Aidan is, involved there. Patrick, was captured here, brought over here, taken back to Ireland. Patrick was involved in the Christianization of Scotland, etc., in the 5th century. So you got this movement of Roman Christianity and Celtic Christianity, which is going to be important later because they're going to argue and fight. I mean, it's what Christians tend to do. They're going to argue and fight over the date of Easter. Whose date is important, kind of a thing. Okay, so Christianity spreads. This is 597, 680. Less than 100 years later, Cadman, supposedly, according to Bede, writes his poem, or another way of putting it, is divinely inspired through a dream. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. Okay? Something new I'm going to skip. Latin is reintroduced to the island of Britain. This is important. When was Latin first introduced? When Caesar brought Latin in along with the Roman troops. Okay? See, Latin influences modern English in 3 main ways. It influences it through its influence first with Celtic, before English even comes over, or before the languages that become English comes over. It influences the second time through the Christianization after Augustine. It's after that that words like cross and altar come in, okay? And then it will influence it again, largely through French, okay? Viking invasions. Big point or event. Viking invasions begin as, I don't remember, did the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle for tonight include the Viking invasions? I looked at it, I'm just trying to blank. I don't remember. I think it did. With the year 787, right? The year 787, right here, it should be this, that's a typo on my part. On this diagram, Qualman Arist 3 Shippu. In these days, came first, that's what the Arist means, 3 ships. 787 is the first year, according to the Chronicle, that the Viking longships were seen. If I remember right, there's another version of the Chronicle that has a similar entry that also talks about either the redness of the sky or a dragon in the sky. It's kind of this portentous, all hell's about to break loose kind of a thing, okay? And it did. When the Vikings first raided, they would hit somebody on the coast, take the wealth, take the goods, rape the women, kill the men, steal the cattle, and leave. That is, it would be a hit, and then they would go. After a while, they started staying, right? So that this begins a period of roughly 200 plus years on and off of Viking attacks, okay? And interestingly, there's a major city in modern day England whose name comes from the Vikings. York comes from Jorvik. Dublin in Ireland comes from Viking. I mean, the name of the town is of Viking origin. And we use words all the time, every day, that are Viking. So whether you know it or not, you speak Old Norse. Here's an example. Whenever you refer to this stuff on your body, the outer part, that's Viking. Skin comes from Viking, comes from Old Norse. It's not Old English, okay? When you look through a glass thing in the wall that enables you to see outside, the window comes from Vindolanda, the eye of the wind. That comes from Viking. You saw it, you saw the Old English form in the translation of the flood. When it talked about Noah went and opened his aether, his eye hole. The thurl is the trill that we use in nostril. It's the hole, okay, in the nose, okay? Well, the window in Old English was the eye hole. It's the hole you looked through, the hole your eye saw through, okay? Old Norse called it a wind hole, probably describing because of what it did. It allowed the wind to come through because they didn't have glass windows and such, okay? So Old Norse radically affects the language. It gives us words that replace other words. It gives us for example, the modern third person singular form of the verb. If you were talking about a boy and the boy is today going to the store, you say what? He goes to the store. That S ending, that's from Old Norse. And in fact, if you use the future, he will be going, or the present participle, he is going. That present participle is from Old Norse. I mean, there's two grammatical things just right there where Old Norse changed the language, okay? Latin never did, French never did. French brought in a lot of words, but it didn't change the language, okay? Skipping a whole bunch. So the Vikings come in, they're called Danes, they're also called heathens. They didn't specify, Danes, Swedish, Norwegians, just Danes or heathens. Again, because they were non-Christian at the time, right? They introduced Old Norse, etc. I'm going to skip a bit. Alfred the Great. Okay, so we're jumping up to 871. Alfred the Great becomes king in 871. He never should have been king. He's the youngest of 4 male children. That in and of itself should tell you he's not supposed to be king. He was bookish. He was more interested in learning and reading poetry. According to his first biographer, his mother challenged her children. First one of you that can learn to read this book can have it. Alfred cheated. According to his biographer, he had someone teach him what was on the first few pages, and he memorized it by sound. He didn't learn how to read. It's kind of like when all my kids were little, and before they learned how to read, I could sit with one of them, at 4 years old with Goodnight Moon, for example, and read Goodnight Moon. And the kids at 4 years old could tell me what was on every page. They didn't read it, but they knew what was there because they'd heard it. Well, that's what Alfred did. And his mother gave him the book of poetry. Right? So he becomes king in 871. Right? Danes keep coming and attacking. Finally, a massive army led by Guthrum the Dane, this is all historical, comes. Alfred, winter of 878, he's on his last legs. He is pushed off. Look at this map down here. He's pushed off down here into the marshes of what is Somerset. He winters in the marshes. I mean, he's like on not solid ground, okay? His men have scattered. He's got very few men. He hears Guthrum is amassing a huge army in this area, And Alfred surprises Guthrum the Dane by coming out of the marshes, sending word to his scattered troops, and they congregate and they defeat Guthrum the Dane, massively outnumbered, right? And he wins. Well, Guthrum, as a result of that, signs what's called the Treaty of Wedmore. We don't know where Wedmore is. It doesn't exist on any map. Anyways, he signs a treaty, and a couple things that this treaty requires. One, Guthrum has got to become a Christian. Two, Alfred will become his sponsor or his godfather. Don't think, gonna make you a thing you can't, not that kind of godfather. Godfather here means someone who will ensure that you know the faith and you live the faith, okay? And according to the evidence that survives, it appears this was a real conversion. Guthrum took it seriously. He never went to war against the English again, even though other Danes did. Okay? Now, one of the things that happens as a result of the Treaty of Wedmore, if you look at this map right here, okay, what is today England gets divided between Alfred's kingdom, which is pretty much this, Wessex and its dependencies, and this area all up here. I'm leaving Mercia out for the moment. All of this area up here where I'm moving the cursor, okay? Well, just a second. So all of that area in there, that's what's called the Dane Law. That means that's where Danish law holds sway. Everything is done according to Danish custom here. Down here, it's English law. It's Alfred's laws. Okay, and that expands up into Mercia, right? Well, that stays that way for 20 years. Alfred has 20 years of peace. During that 20 years, he expands his kingdom up here into Mercia. He creates a British Navy so that when the Vikings do come back, they can battle them on the sea before they land. He starts schools, founds what are called scriptoria, that is monasteries that will copy books and such, okay? Apparently, he invents the lantern. That is, think of this bottle. He takes 4 sheets, you can't see that bottle because of the thing. He takes 4 sheets of like horn, like cow horn material, shaves them really thin so that light will shine through. And apparently Alfred is the first person in history who comes up with the idea of doing that, putting them on a sheet of wood, put a candle inside, put a lid on top with a hole so that smoke can get out, and you can walk around in the dark and the wind won't blow your light out. Apparently nobody had thought about that before. Right? So his son becomes king. Edgar, I'm getting mixed up. I've got another thing that has all these kings. Who is that? I don't have it on these notes either. Alfred dies, his son becomes king, his grandson fights a huge battle up here in the north called the Battle of Brunanburh. I think, yes, we're doing that October 13th, where he defeats 5 kings. If you're a Tolkien fan, where there's a battle of 5 armies. It's the battle of 5 armies from The Hobbit, and becomes really the first king of all England, because the Danes are defeated, The Scots are defeated. The Picts are defeated. Somebody else is defeated. Okay. His grandson then becomes king, Athelred the Unred. Okay. Often you will hear Unred called unready. It's not what it means. Okay. Go back to Alfred for a minute. Alfred means Alf advised. Red means advised. It's a wonderful English word where we still use it in its old English meaning, but in its modern English spelling and pronunciation. We use it only in one context. If you are arrested in the United States, what must a police officer do? Read you your Miranda rights. But we tend to think that means read, as in pull out the little card and advise you, or read to you. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you. You do not have to speak without an attorney present. It means to be advised of your rights. It doesn't mean to literally be read. It's the only case where that word is used with its old English meaning. Okay? So, what does the Alf part mean? There's a TV sitcom back in the 80s, early 90s, I never watched it, called, some of you are grinning, Alf. Well, that was about a space extraterrestrial. Alf means elf. Elf advised. Now, that's a cool name if you understand who the elves are. According to Anglo-Saxon mythology, the elves are supernatural beings. Let me rephrase that. They are other natural beings. That is, they're not beings from our perception of reality. They're beings from an other world, the Celtic other world. Okay? So Alfred's name means kind of like otherworldly being advised. Like he's got deep insight. So anybody named Alfred, so if you know Dr. Lutz, you know, that's kind of what's being talked about there. So Alfred means elf advised. Athelred, the Athel means noble, princely, advised. Noble, princely, advised, and then you have the epithet. The unread, the ill-advised, the unadvised. He got the epithet after he was king, after he died. Why? Because like the one character in the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, he chose poorly. He acted unwisely, right? He didn't stand up, according to the Anglo-Saxons at least, he didn't stand up to the Vikings when they began their raids again, which they began fairly soon after he became king, right? So he becomes king in 979, just about 100 years, a little bit less than that, but just about 100 years after Alfred did. The Danes renew their attacks. He abdicates the throne in 1014. He flees to France. He leaves his wife. He flees to France. His wife is Emma, and when he leaves her, that's what then will lead ultimately to William the Conqueror's claim on the throne in 1066. Okay, Ethelred dies in 1016. Canute, or also spelled Canute, son of Svein Forkbeard. You got to love some of these guys' names, you know. Forkbeard becomes king in 1016. He rules till 1035. His son becomes king, 1035, rules till 1042. And then Ethelred's son, Edward, comes back and becomes king in 1042. Okay? Edward the Confessor. Edward the Confessor dies on January 4th, 1066. Harold Godwinson is elected king by the Witan. He's the son of Godwin, who is really the most powerful man in England at that time. He's the Earl of Mercia. This whole area, I mean, huge landowner. Okay? He becomes king. Harold Godwinson does on January 5th. And that's the death of Edward the Confessor is what leads to the Norman conquest later on in 1066. Do I want to go into that? We've got a little over an hour. Real quickly, nutshell version. In the 1050s, Harold Godwinson visited Normandy and was taken captive by William of Normandy. Now, William of Normandy was called by the English William the Bastard, because he was. He was literally a bastard. He was also figuratively or metaphorically a bastard. So he fit both terms, right? According to some anecdotal evidence and according to the Bio-Tapestry, and the Bio-Tapestry is this woven tapestry, 18 inches wide, okay? And if I remember right, 160 feet long. It's huge, okay? The Bio-Tapestry was woven after the Norman conquest, and it is an account of everything leading up to and after the Norman conquest. That is, it's made in panels. I'll put an image of it up. It's made in panels, and it recounts the events that lead to the Norman conquest and after, okay? One of the panels shows Harold Godwinson meeting with William of Normandy, and they're sitting either side of a table. And according to the script that is sewn in at that point, it's essentially saying, you know, that Harold agrees to Norman. Once had a student write a paper on Norman the Conqueror, and I can never get that out of my mind. Harold agrees to William the Conqueror's request, according to the tapestry, that should Edward die without heir, William will become king, because he does have a claim to the throne through Emma, okay? Who is Edward's mother, right? So, what the tapestry also shows is that on the stretchers, which are the pieces of wood that connect the legs of the table down at the bottom, that on the stretcher beneath the table, hidden where Harold Godwinson cannot see it, is a Bible. So that when Harold Godwinson made this agreement with William of Normandy, it was essentially an oath on a Bible. So this thing has power, so to speak. Okay? Harold Godwinson becomes king January 5th, when Edward is dead. He's just broken the oath. Word gets sent to William of Normandy. He receives word in like March. He's pretty upset about it. He immediately orders a navy to be built. So he starts building hundreds of ships, all right? I'm going to leave Harold Godwinson's older brother out for the moment, because he also claims the throne. September rolls around, okay? Now, I take that back. I can't leave Harold's brother out. Harold's brother, Tostig, Tostig, and it means, Tosti means heady, full of himself, okay? Well, when Harold was made king, Harold was made king, Tosti fled England. He went off to Norway. He's going to join up with the king of Norway, and they're going to attack England because he wants the throne. Okay? So jump up to September. In September, and I've got this pulled up on the notes, this page on the notes now. In September, word reaches Harold Godwinson down in London, Winchester, that his brother has landed in the north of England. Okay, hold on just one sec. So Harold now has to raise an army and march north. Okay, and the reason I said he has to raise an army is they don't have a standing army. See, kind of in the history of the English world up until this point, you only have an army when you need to fight. If you're at peace, you don't need to fight, so you don't have an army. So he's got to march north to Yorkshire because Harold has set up camp. Harold, Harald, King of Norway, and Tosti, okay, Harold, Godwinson's brother, have set up camp at a place called Stamford Bridge. So now Harold, Harold, has got to march north and raise an army. So he has to raise the Fyrd and fight them. Look at the time of year this is. This is September. What are most men going to be doing at this time? Harvesting. They've got to set up their crops for winter. Why? They don't have Walmart and 7-Eleven. They can't go buy their food for the winter. So what is going to keep them through the winter has got to get put in their barns and storehouses. Okay? And now the king has got to raise an army. So he has his own personal, set of troops, kind of like his personal Fyrd, if you want, his secret service, so to speak. But he also has to raise a real army. It's 180 miles from London to Stamford Bridge. They do that in 4 days. Most of the men are marching. That's like 45 miles a day, marching. Okay. Now, some of those men, they aren't coming from London. They're picking them up in, Cambridge and Peterborough and other places as they march north. So they don't have as far. So he gets up north. He defeats his brother, 185 miles, sorry. He defeats his brother and Harold of Norway, kills his brother. And while up there on September 25th, a messenger comes from London. William of Normandy has landed on the southern coast with a huge army. He's landed at Pevensey, okay? So, Harold Godwinson is now 180 miles from London, okay? And now he's got to get down to the southern coast. Well, that's another 75 miles, just about, 70 miles from London. So he's got to march from Stamford Bridge in Yorkshire now down to Hastings, where William has set up camp. And he has to raise a new army, because the army he raised to fight Harold and Tosti was raised to fight Harold and Tosti. That is, they weren't just, generally conscripted. So talk about being, between a rock and a hard place. Because those guys now get to go back to their homes. So now he's got to raise a new army. And he has to march 250 miles. So he does. He gets down to Hastings. It's actually not Hastings. If you visit the Battle of Hastings today, you take a train from London, you go to Hastings, but then you take another train and you go to Battle. Because the actual battle site is 6 miles, about 6 miles from Hastings, and it's in the town of Battle, B-A-T-T-L-E. But the Battle of Battle doesn't sound good, so it's the Battle of Hastings. Anyways, he gets down there and he fights William of Normandy and his French troops. Okay, it's an all-day battle. It should have been won by the English. And the reason I say that is if you look at this little diagram here, okay, these are the French troops down here. And this kind of squiggly line, that's showing the ridge. See, when they got down there, where the battle occurred, you had high ground and low ground. And for some reason, and nobody can explain it, William took the low ground. Read books of military strategy, read about previous battles, and what all the military geniuses will tell you is take the high ground. Why? Because then, assuming they're the French here, if you want to attack the French, what do you have to do? If you want to attack the English, what do you have to do? You got to go uphill. You have to run uphill, okay? And these guys are armored. Not armored like you see late medieval knights, full coats of armor, but chainmail. Go to any National Trust place, go to any castle in England today, and you can put on sample chainmail. The chainmail shirt is going to weigh minimum 40 pounds. More likely 50, 60 pounds. Try running wearing 60 pounds of steel. It's not easy. Try running uphill. Maybe with a 6 to 10 pound broadsword in your hand, or even a shorter sword that's 5 to 6 pounds, or an 8-foot spear with a 2-pound spearhead on it. It's hard. Anyways, William's troops take this ground. Harold's troops take this ground and form a shield wall. Shield wall means they interlock one arm so that the shields make a constant wall, okay, with a spear poking through. And here's, according to eyewitness accounts, here's what happens. The French attack. They run up the hill. The English shield wall stands firm. The French retreat. There's a reason that, is a meme, about the French retreating. The French attack again. It's a hot day, according to the accounts. The French retreat again. Okay? This so far has taken several hours. Because this is about, if I remember right, I was there several years ago, and the hill is no longer nearly as high as it used to be, right? And it's been cleared and all this kind of stuff. The French attack again, and they retreat. This time, when they retreat, the English do something foolish. They break their shield wall. They chase the French. Okay? So think of this right here. And this is Alfred's, what are called his house carls. These are his house soldiers. These are the cream of the crop. These are the SEALs. Okay, the guys you don't want to mess with. And they, in this group, when the French retreat, think what I said earlier again about nature abhorring a vacuum. There's a huge sucking sound as they retreat, and the English pour in after them. Now, what the English are unaware of is that on either side, hidden behind tree line, here and here, over here, the French have cavalry, mounted troops. So when the English pour through here, the French create what's called a pincer movement. Boom. Hammer meets anvil. Well, the anvil's right in here, and the English just get slaughtered. I mean, just hammer and tongs. They're just slaughtered. Harold Godwinson dies, again, according to anecdotal account, by an arrow through the eye. He looks up, and an arrow pierces his visor, kills him on the spot. Okay, very, very quickly. The day is won by the French. This is October 14th, 1066. So Harold Godwinson dies that day. Christmas Day, 1066, William of Normandy is crowned King of England. He does it on Christmas Day because he's emulating someone. He's mimicking someone. Christmas Day, the year 800 AD, Charlemagne, Charles the Great, had himself crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope. He made the Pope do it. He essentially handed him the crown and said, now give it back. Put it on my head. Okay? William the Conqueror is doing the same thing. He's just not having the Pope do it. He has the Archbishop of Canterbury do it. Okay? So he's crowned King of England. It's not that as of Christmas Day, 1066, all the English are suddenly swearing fealty to him. He has to fight English holdouts for 20 years. Okay? And when he does that, when he fights them, when he battles them, one of the things that he begins doing is he starts building castles. And some of the greatest castles in England that you can go to today, you can go and you can see parts of the original castles that William the Conqueror himself had begun. For example, Warwick Castle in Warwick, England, where Shakespeare probably played at times. Okay, you can see the big, beautiful castle that was built later. You go to the big mound. That's the original part of the castle that William the Conqueror built. Go to the Tower of London, central London. Look at the white tower. That's the central big boxy tower. That dates, that survives from William the Conqueror's time. Okay? So what he did was he built castles all over. Why? They're a sign of his strength. Castles were meant to house his troops so that if there was an uprising, he could send his troops out to slaughter and kill. Okay? That's the end of Anglo-Saxon England. All right. So let me stop sharing that page and see. Let me think if there's, yeah, let's do this now. 4:37, just not quite an hour. Yes, go ahead.
I've got a quick question.
Sure.
So, is this kind of where the notorious French-English animosity originated, or is this okay? I'm not quite as up to date on my British history as I should be, and so I figured this was the starting point for it.
Yeah, this is it. I mean, 1066, you know, in terms of English-French animosity, it's the mother of all battles. Because and we may not get to what we need to. Before 1066, and this is part of the language part, so it does apply. You already had Old English undergoing change. That is, inflections were already starting to drop off. Now, the language that we'll be reading, the language that you'll be translating, is almost all of it is written in what's called the late West Saxon dialect. Okay, West Saxon, Alfred the Great. Late West Saxon, that's the dialect of the 10th century largely, 900s. All right, it's the highest form of Anglo-Saxon, if you want. Think of it. Some people today, and I'm kind of one of them. Some people today, look at the English language and say, okay, when was the glory period of the English language? And a lot of people will say Shakespeare. Shakespeare's the greatest exemplar in terms of the writing of the English language, the creativity, creating words, all that kind of stuff. Well, that was 500 years ago. Okay. Well, in Anglo-Saxon England, what was produced the 50 years before 1000 AD up to maybe 25 years after, that's the highest, that's the peak of the language. It's the peak of the literary expression, right? So much earlier stuff, we see a lot of dialectal variables, and that kind of gradually drops off, and we get this, kind of King Jamesy. Look at it, think of it that way. A lot of people think of, the King James Version of the Bible, for example, greatest translation ever written, even though there's a lot of inaccuracies because of the version that it was based on, largely Jerome's Vulgate and such. All right. So by 1066, in fact, even earlier than that, by 1030, 1040, that real high point of Anglo-Saxon literary excellence was starting to devolve, if you want, or evolve, if you want. It was starting to become what would become Middle English. Okay? Something, however, really sped that up, and that was the Norman Conquest.
Right.
Because
I'm just making sure I'm thinking about this right. Isn't it that's kind of where the Proto-French influence in the language?
It's entirely, that is entirely where the French influence began.
I would be mad if somebody came in and took over my whole language. So
well, I mean, go back for a moment to Romano-Celtic Britain and think of the people living Romano-Celtic Britain in 440 AD. They are speaking probably a pidgin of Latin and Celtic. We don't know what that language is because we don't have anything that survives from it. But they're probably speaking a pidgin, that is, it's a mixture of the two that enabled the speakers, and it developed into its own real language, okay? And then the Anglo-Saxons come in, and that gets wiped out, okay? So Anglo-Saxon reaches this pinnacle. And that's not to say that everything before that is poor. Even though Bede wrote entirely in Latin, there are other poets writing at the time in Old English. The Dream of the Rood probably dates from the early 8th century. Many people, most Beowulf scholars, argue that Beowulf was originally composed probably in the early 8th century, 700 to maybe 750, okay? But the things like the elegies, the wanderer, the seafarer, those probably date from the 10th century, 950 or so. But by 1066, by the time of William the Conqueror, the inflectional endings on words are already starting to drop off. Okay? Vowels in words are starting to change. What we're going to talk about in just a moment. The great vowel shift probably starts. It isn't complete until 1600, but some of those vowels start to begin to shift. The long vowels in Old English are generally the long vowels in Middle English, but by the time you get to the end of the Middle English period, they're radically shifting. Okay, so yeah, I mean, what the Norman Conquest introduces is roughly 250 to 300 years of French linguistic dominance over English. So imagine being an English speaker and everybody in government speaks a language you don't understand. I don't mean politicalese. I mean a literal language you don't understand. And within 50 years of the Norman Conquest, every member of the church hierarchy, every bishop, does not speak your language. It's one of the things William does. He gets rid of all English bishops. And when I say get rid of, I mean they're killed. By the end of his 20 years, he dies in 1087, all the English aristocracy, so all the earls, are dead. Every last one of them. He replaces the entire aristocracy with a French aristocracy. So if you want to go all Marxist, I mean, you want to talk about a class system, I mean, you got the hugest class differences here now, because native Anglo-Saxon speakers are all workers and peasants. Those above them are all French. Okay? So French is the language spoken for the next 250 years. We can talk another day about how interesting it is then that English makes the comeback and English overcomes French. And French, interestingly, French doesn't affect the grammar at all. Old Norse did. Old Norse did not have the effect. You know, it didn't have the power that French did. And yet it changes our grammar. You know, the ing ending, the s ending, you know. Yeah, French brings in a ton of words, which we'll talk about. That's why we see so many French words today, for which we also have English words. You get in trouble with the law, you can have someone help represent you, and you can call that person one of two things, right? You can call him or her an attorney, or you can call him or her a lawyer. Two different words that describe the exact same job. One is French, one is Old English. You can go kill something out in the field. You can cook it up as meat. You can have pork, French, or you can have pig. You can have beef, or you can have cow. Two different things that describe the same, two different words that describe the same thing. All right. Well, maybe not real quickly. Any other questions? That was a great question, by the way, or comment. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about pronunciation. So I need to pull up a couple of things. The first one is this. Okay, this is the vowel triangle, and it says the vowel triangle for modern English. Hold on a second. So what this is referring to is where these sounds are made in your mouth. Okay. So high front is referring to where the tongue is, and mid and low is, so high front, the tongue is high towards the front of the mouth, mid is in the middle of the mouth, low it's bottom of the mouth, and then back, the tongue is towards the back of the mouth. And these are the sounds. And so you've got these symbols here, these are kind of phonetic symbols, and you see here's the key for them. So this is not the grapheme / letter I. This represents the sound E as in machine. This is the sound I in wit, the vowel. This is the sound A in eight, right? E in pet, A in cat, the A in park. To my ear, these are the same. The A in father, okay? The A in Faulkner or bought or caught. You kind of got to get a bit of a Northeastern or a British pronunciation for that. Or the A in law, okay? O in hope, U in push, U in okay? And then these are the two diphthongs. Notice what I just did there, because I kept the sound going. It started to get to that. If you carry it too long, it becomes this, and then ow, it becomes the sound, okay? Ow. All right, so go back down here now. The Great Vowel Shift, and the reason I'm talking about the Great Vowel Shift is not because it's important for Anglo-Saxon. It's not. It's important because it'll help you to look at a word and kind of go, now, if I apply the Great Vowel Shift, what will this become in modern English? And it can help you in your translating. Because a lot of Anglo-Saxon words are identifiable if you understand the principle of the Great Vowel Shift, okay? So what happens? In the Great Vowel Shift, all Old English long vowels gradually shift up, okay? That is, they move up in that chart. And I say from 1000 to 1600 AD, yeah, from 1000 to 1400, it's almost unnoticeable, right? In the Middle English period, it's largely the vowels are the same, but it started, and it affects things like diphthongs more than it does the long vowels. So there is a mnemonic device to use to help remember this, okay? And the mnemonic device is this. Now, what I've given you here is the phonetic equivalent. The phrase, if you want to write it down, is, my feet ache, so do ours. I know, it makes no sense. My feet ache, so do ours. That's what this on the right, the modern English, shows you. My, so you've got the M, I, F, E, T, A, that's the sound. My feet ache, so do ours. That's how you write that in this simplified phonetic alphabet, okay? That's modern English. Old English, here's how that would sound. Ni feet ak, sa do ours. Mi feit ak sa do urs. So think of this, think of these sounds as being Old English. Let me rephrase that. When you look at the vowel triangle, some of you said, you've had Spanish. If you've had Spanish, you've had French, German, Italian. If you've had any European language, if you've ever studied any European foreign language, maybe with the exception of Slavic, Western European, okay, Germanic or Italic languages, Germanic or Romance languages, okay. The vowels of Old English have continental values. That is, they have the same values as they would have if you knew French, German, Italian, etc. Okay, so mi feit ak sa do urs. Here's the E, right? So look at the me becomes modern English my. What does that mean? This E jumps up. Why does it jump up? Why does it go to the middle of the mouth? Because high front means it can't go any higher and it can't get any fronter. E, okay? I, it moves into the mouth, all right? So the next one, the next vowel, A becomes E. So this shifts forward. And the same thing, becomes A. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of translating? Think of a word that we've seen, or that's even in the syllabus, that has a long, this one doesn't work, sound here. Because this is the sound, the is the sound that you see in stana. I suggested that you take demonstrative pronouns and connect them with the noun, and the noun was stan, S-T-A-N. Well, that's modern English. Becomes O, S-T-A-N. Ston becomes stone. Okay. R-A-D, pronounced rod, odd, becomes road. B-A-N, bon, becomes bone. All right? That's the vowel shift. So you can look at other, and we'll talk, I'll point some out when we get to, assuming we get to some of the translations. So I wanted to at least throw that out because it might, I don't know that it will, it might help as you work on translating, okay? Okay, let me stop sharing that. I don't have the texts to pull up. So, one other thing about pronunciation, and then we'll spend a few minutes on translations, okay? There's only 7 of you now, so we have, each person can do a little bit more. If you have your books in front of you, open to, where is this? The Writing and Pronunciation of Old English, make sure I've got your book, on page 403. Because you are going to, I won't have you do it today. I'll have you practice and we can start it next week. You are going to be reading the material in Old English. And I'm not sure how it's going to work on Zoom because the sound quality sometimes isn't very good. It's difficult enough in an in-person class because people often kind of talk like this and they hide their mouths and they don't want to be loud and stuff. So I want to talk briefly about the section on pronunciation, okay? Almost all the consonants are exactly what you're familiar with, okay? Couple of big variations, however. the pronunciation of the letter C, that is when you see the letter C, how is it pronounced? Okay. The letter G, how it will be pronounced. The letter H, sometimes, not nearly as much. F, the thorn and ev, and then vowels. And we'll talk about vowels in a moment. So, page 405, top of the page on that chart. B, D, K, L, M, N, T, W, X. So, B, D, K, L, M, N, T, W. Exactly the same as in modern English. Okay? C, the letter C. Now, in your book, and in fact, in most grammar books of Old English, and most readers and most beginners' books of Old English, a convention has arisen over the last, 40 or 50 years. It was in a book I used in the early 1990 or so, and that book had a publication date of 72, I think. So, yeah, it's at least 50 years. The convention has arisen for the letter C, of sometimes presenting it just as the letter C, and sometimes as a C with a dot over it. And the same thing with the letter G, right? The dot indicates what's called palatalization or velarization, depending on the letter. So let's talk about the letter C, okay? Your text mentions 3 different pronunciations, okay? And these are going to be hard to remember. But there are a couple of things that really help, okay? The initial one, the hard one, what's called the velar. And that's because it's made in the back of the mouth, okay? Just like in modern ket, come, carry. Trying to find another one. Cucumber. Cumberbund. Trying to think of one with a CU. Because all the ones that I just used have a hard k sound, but what follows them? Either an A, an O, or a U, or U, as I should pronounce it. So either an A, O, or U. Okay? So the hard one, before and when final, that is when it's the last letter of the word, before and after A, O, U letters, A, O, U, or Y. Here's an example for one with the Y. Kyning, Kyning, C-Y-N-I-N-G. Modern English king. Okay? So Kyning, Kume, Khan, etc. Right? So those are all pretty easy. Or if it comes before another consonant, the last word included in your thing. Knicht, Knicht. Notice, no silent letters. No silent letters. Knicht becomes what in modern English? K-N-I-G-H-T. That's because of French, by the way. I'm going to blame a lot in terms of modern pronunciation on French, and it's because of the Norman conquest. The French would hear that sound in Knicht, and the French doesn't have that sound. Le trésor in French, L-E-S, new word, T-R-E-S, new word, spelling's probably going to be wrong, H-E-U-E-R-E-S, okay, le trésor, the S on the T-R-E-S elides to the beginning of the next word. Modern English, you're hosting a party, you have little finger snacky food. What do you call that if you want to be fancy? You don't call it finger snacky food. hors d'oeuvres, hors d'oeuvres. What's the first word? You pronounce it or. You don't pronounce it hors d'oeuvres, I hope, okay? But it begins with an H. You have no initial H sounds in French. Nothing in French would start with okay? Uer, H-E-U-E-R, like the name of the watchmaker. Tag Uer. The H is totally silent, okay? So you then have the soft or palatalized form, okay? And it's pronounced like ch in church, okay? That is always dotted in your text. So whenever you see the dot, it's ch sound, okay? So where does this one occur? This occurs before or between E, the letter E, and the letter I, whether it's I with a macron, the line over it, or without the macron. So if it's before an E, or before an I, or before a long I, or if it's between E and I, or between I and I, it's the ch sound, okay? Or if it's after I or E, and then they, have to throw in a zinger, or the ash, okay? Long ash. In all those instances, it's palatalized. It's the ch sound. So, itch, itch. In German, that will become, modern German, it become ich, right? In Middle English at times, it will be written ik, ich. Okay, so itch, itch, chiriche, chiriche, church. Why? Because it comes before an I, and the last one, it comes between an I and an E. So if it's between those two vowels, it's automatically ch. If it comes after an I, it's a ch. If it comes after an E, it's a ch. If it comes before an E, it's a ch. Okay? So, child, modern English child. Tet-John, Tet-John. Why? Not because it doesn't have anything to do with the A. It's because it becomes after the long A sound. Okay? There are exceptions, as there always are. So, with good historical explanation. So, for example, Old English, kane, kane. Notice it's not chena, has the hard C. Why? As in keen. The way you can know the exceptions, let me rephrase that. A good guess for the exceptions, modern English pronunciation. If the modern English has the ch sound, like child, it probably has the ch. If the modern English, if you can look at it and go, I think that's modern English. If the modern English has the k sound, it probably has the k sound. All the A-O and U's, it's going to be hard without a doubt, okay? Whilche, which, that's modern English which, okay? Sorry, I threw an A on the end and it doesn't have it. And there's a note below, okay? The next one, which I'm not going to say much about. CG is always pronounced like modern English DGE. J, j, like the j in gem, or the j in both of them in judge. So CG always that way, okay? F, two pronunciations. One is called voiced, one is called unvoiced. We'll do the unvoiced one first. It's the f in father, okay? The voiced one is the v in have, okay? So it's voiceless when initial or final. So if the F is at the beginning of the word or the end of the word. And you'll probably, your mouth, whether you think about it or not, might want to make that when it's at the end of a word, you might want to make it the V sound, because a lot of our modern English words, when you get that at the end of a word, maybe not a lot, several, it is voiced. It's the V sound, okay? So you got some examples there. Fader, father, plaf, loaf, with, woman or wife. And then it's voiced when it comes between vowels or other voiced sounds. So what's a voiced sound? Anything that has kind of a rubbing, it's called a fricative. Anything that has kind of a rubbing or a vibration of the vocal cords. So here's an example of a rubbing. D, d, d. It starts in the back of the throat, but it's finished at the teeth. D, b, b, b. That's a voiced sound. V is a voice sound. N is a voice sound. N is a voiced sound. Okay. So voiced. Hlavas. Hlavas. Okay. Havda. Havda. Why? It's got the vowel in front and it's got a voiced element, the d sound after. And just try and say it the other way. Literally, try and say havda. It's harder. See, what your mouth is already doing, it's already getting ready for the next sound. It's a process of what's called assimilation. Our mind, because we have grammar built into us, our mind understands this. And some people have argued that native English speakers have a facility for learning Old English because Old English is kind of built in, let's say, genetically to modern English, right? Okay, the G's. What time is it? We'll see if we get there. G's. Again, hard and soft. Hard velar is made in the back of the mouth. It's the G in God and good, okay? Just like the C in cat comes before and after A, O, and U. So if you have a G and A, O, or U come after it, or A, O, or U come before it, it's the hard G sound, right? Also, when it comes at the beginning of words, before consonants, so God, a god, lagu, and Gnornian. That's how you pronounce that other one. Gnornian, right? I could have used, for the C, for the hard one before another consonant, canal. Canal. Modern English, no. Knee or canal. Canal. Modern English, K-N-E-E. Knee, right? So the soft G, the palatalized G, is like the ya in yet, or yes, or ya, if you want. So again, beginning of words before E or I, whether short or long, and at the end of words, when it comes after E or I or ash. So if it comes at the beginning of a word and it's before E or I, it's ya, right? If it comes at the end of a word and it comes after E or I or ash, you pronounce it ya. So yar, yar, yif, thane, y. See, it's hard to hear it in that word thane unless you really slow down your pronunciation. Thane, okay? Day, yeah. You're not saying day, yeah. It's day. And that becomes modern English, day. Even though In another context in Old English, you throw an inflectional ending on that, and day becomes dagum, as you saw in some of the translations we've done, okay? He. It's hard for me to say it without the but it's not yeah, it's y. It's the y in yes, okay? H, almost exactly the same as modern English, except for a few times when you get that kind of the guttural sound that I pronounced with kini, where you get the breathing, right? That breathing sound, that sound drops off in Middle English as a result of the Norman conquest and the influence of French. That's why we have silent GHs in the middle of words, because of French, okay? R is probably trilled when initial. Other than that, pretty much the same. S has both the smooth or unvoiced S sound and the Z sound, okay? So when it comes between vowels or next to a voiced consonant, it's the Z sound. Reason, okay? Wisdom. And in modern English, S elsewhere. SC is always ship, with I think only one or two exceptions, and they're given here. Askian, ask. Askian, okay? Everywhere else, it's the sh sound. And one of the reasons that's different is because you have a break in syllables. Askian, okay? Thorn and eth are interchangeable, and that's the two last letters. Those two letter forms come from runes. They come from the Germanic runic alphabet, which we'll talk about later. They can be pronounced unvoiced, like the TH in thin, or voiced like the TH in them. TH in thigh, TH in thick, or the TH in there, TH in thy, okay? Consonants are pretty clear. One comment about the diphthongs. The diphthong is when you have two vowels together and you have a movement in the pronunciation from one vowel to the other vowel, but you pronounce them as one sound, okay? Or you pronounce them as one sound and one syllable. For example, the Old English heroic warrior, Beowulf, Beowulf, Beo, it's one sound, it's one syllable. You're starting to say the A and you shift to the O. You don't say Beowulf, Beowulf. Old English word for light, L-E-O-H-T, Lecht, okay? But there are a bunch of the diphthongs. If you look at that page 406, there are, what, 8 of them, right? So those just take practice. Deop, D-E-O-P, Deop, D-E-A-P, Deor, D-E-O-R, okay? And there are other examples. I don't want to talk about long vowels. Okay, so don't set that aside. It's about the 20 minutes we have left. Any questions? I know this has been long. You guys have been, sitting there a long time. Where am I looking at tonight? Syllabus for tonight. We have the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the Old English Gospels, Matthew 27, and King Alfred's Psalms. Let's let's look at just lost my place again. Let's look at section chapter 8, whatever that thing's called, first. And I'm not going to have you read Old English. What I want you to do is I'll just ask for a volunteer. Page 99. And I think some of you sent this, your translations. I'm sorry, I've not looked at them yet. I have been reading, and I think I posted something about it. I have been reading the, come on, brain work, article summaries. I commented on one or two. The first week's, which I think was last week, the ones you did for last week, were all good articles, even though, you know, I don't remember which one of you did. The one by Lees and Overing, I kind of ripped apart. Generally, though, they were all good. I mean, that's a solid article. It's published in a major anthology. It's just, I think, has some methodological problems. And should I go there?
It was me. It was mine.
No, that's okay. I had a student.
I like that too, because I never liked that article because I read it before and I'm like, what is this?
Well, last time I taught this course, I had a student who wrote a seminar paper, and I'll just tell you now, so it's kind of general warning. Who wrote a seminar paper on I don't remember what it was, performative gender in Anglo-Saxon literature, performative masculinity or something like that. And he based a lot of it on, he based quite a bit of it on that article. And I read it, and it was he was a PhD student. It was pretty long papers, 20, 25 pages. And the entire paper was built upon assumptions. That is, the entire paper was one assumption after another. That is, nothing was proven. Nothing was stated as based upon text. It was based upon reading this ideology from the 21st century into the text. And I'll just tell you right now, I've got a real problem with that approach. And part of that's because, you know, I'm a textual scholar. My dissertation was a scholarly edition of something. So the words on the page are pretty important. We can argue about how those words got there, what the words mean and such. But, you know, the comment, you know, I think I made when I replied to your thing, just be aware that whatever you choose, that it's based upon whatever it is they say they're writing about. The article by Lees and Overing, I mean, they're essentially taking Bede to task for suggesting that Bede doesn't spend any time on Abbas Hild. Well, that's because, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, please do, the article's all about the chapter in Bede that's about Cadman. But the very next, literally, you turn the page. The next chapter in Bede is entirely about Abbas Hild. So they're faulting Bede for, quote unquote, sliding Hild in the chapter on Cadman. But the chapter on Cadman is on Cadman. The next chapter is on Hild. That's a problem. That's a problem of allowing one's assumptions to overtake your place. So anyways, the student wrote this paper, and I'll tell you, I'll warn you, I do this. I was talking with Dr. McDaniel the other day about it. She was just laughing again. You know, I just started putting so-and-so, I won't tell you his name. This is just utter bullshit. It's just one string of BS after another, because the argument he was making was not based upon the text he was arguing it was about. You know, and I gave it back to him the beginning of the next semester, first day of Beowulf. You know, it's interesting when I do that, because I give the papers back, you know, and all the color drained from his face, and I thought, oh no, here it comes. You know, and he was quiet and stuff. And the next week he said, you know, Dr. Sherman, you were right. That really was. He said, I've never had anybody point out that, you know, what I thought was an argument was a series of assumptions rather than a logical argument where, you know, a point is made, a position is taken, and then I substantiate it with not only text from words from the text itself, but then also, you know, what secondary scholars, you know, that kind of thing. Those kinds of folks have made it. So all that's to say, I was pleased with what you've chosen. I mean, even because the Over in Lee's article, I mean, it's good for pointing out that kind of issue. Anyways, okay, so what did I say we were going to do? We were going to do Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, which is section 8. So if somebody wants to pick up on page 99 and just read your translation for the first line. You don't have to do the year. You can if you want. I've got the years written in my other version. So it begins with Herr Coleman erist tha. There it is. Herr Coleman erist tha, and I'm just going to use modern English, 7 Shippu, and Yehergolden, can't read that, Humtun. Anybody? Your translation, just your translation of that line. Perfect. Okay. Now, when you did that, did you have any trouble finding anything? Or let me back up. Did you have any trouble finding any of the words, for example, this entire passage in the glossary? Okay. Did the translation this week, because you did one last week also, was it any easier than the one you did last? I don't mean easier, you know, the material was actually easier, but was the process of translating at all easier? Okay, I'm seeing some heads nod. Why? Why do you think it was?
I think we're starting to recognize which words in Old English are very similar to ones in modern English, so we kind of can do a little bit more guesswork rather than looking at every single word.
True. One thing to be aware of, and Marsden mentions this where? I think it's in the pronunciation. No, it's in the beginning Old English section. Be aware of what the French call faux amis, false friends. A word that looks like a word in modern English, and it turns out it's not it at all. For example, the pronoun him, H-I-M. Sometimes it is him. Sometimes it's modern English dative plural them. Him can be singular. It can also be dative. It can also be dative plural. Okay, so there are some of those. But I mean, just in this first line, hair is pretty close to here. There's an example, by the way, if you're familiar with the great vowel shift, A to E, he, E, okay? Coleman, come, comes, came, erist. I mean, what does that literally mean, erist? If something comes ere something, it means before, right? So it's beforest. If you were to translate that literally, beforest, most before, all right? But we would say first, okay? And they did what? How did you translate Yehergodin? I think you said harried. No, you said ravaged. You said ravaged, right, Elizabeth? But that's the modern English that comes from that is harried. To harry something. We don't use that verb very often. It's often only used if someone is flustered. They get harried. They get, they kind of lose control, so to speak. Okay, so I won't have anybody do the next line since there's nothing there other than the date. What about the next line? Here, let me read it in Old English. Herr Fortferde, Alfera Elderman, und fang Alfrich. Why? It's the ch, because it comes at the end and it's after that long I. To thom ilkan. Why is it the hard k? There's no I, there's no E. It's not at the end. Okay. Ilkan Eldor. Sorry, I'm reading at the wrong angle. Elderdome. So, Herr Fortferde Alfred Elderman anfing Alfrich Totham Ilkan Elderdome. Anybody? Somebody else? Elizabeth, your mic's turned off, or your, okay. Anybody? Come on. Sarah?
Yeah, I'll try. I have it as here went forth Alfred Ildorman and succeeded Alfred to that same Ildormanry.
Okay, good. Fortferde. Think of that literally. And if you get that word hoard book that I mentioned the first night of class, this is what it's really good at. It kind of breaks out etymologies. Forth, okay, ferde. Ferde comes from fahren, to travel, traveled forth. So went forth. Alfred, what's another name for alderman? We have it today. If you're a politician in Chicago, you are still called an alderman. Okay, it's kind of like the local councilman, the local politician, the local bigwig. Okay, and he did what? Pardon?
Is it like an
No, it's like an earl. And later on, I mean, when we do the Battle of Malden, we will see Earl Birknoth is also called an alderman. Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. So how did you translate fang? Probably with the gloss right below. Succeeded. Yeah. It literally means something more like took. Okay. And he took it because the other one was dead. It's not that he took it from him. All right. Go on to, I know we've only got a few minutes left. Next line. Herr Fortferde, se Heilige Bishop, Alderwold, Munike Fader, and Herr was, notice the smooth or the unvoiced S ending on was, not was, and Herr was Edwine to abod, you pronounce both B's because it's doubled. Abbod, Yahalgod, to Aban Dune. So here, they pretty much all begin this way. Anybody? Good. So here went forth, here forth went the holy bishop, Athelwold, Munike father, father of monks. That's what that means. That's why, because he's an abbot. He's the head monk, right? And here was Edwin to abbot, what? Yahalagon. Notice the verb is put after what happens. He was consecrated is the gloss that's given you, but it's the same Yahalagod to become Yahalagod Bethi Nama in the Lord's Prayer. Hallowed. You know, we use the Latin term consecrated in modern English. Hallowed just means made holy, or holied if you want, sanctified, okay? Okay, next line. Herr Alfrich Alderman was ut adravid, adravid, because it's between two vowels. So what happened to Alfrich? Was driven out. The ah at the beginning, I think I mentioned the first night of class, you know, I put up that list of prefixes. The ah is an intensifier. It's just, you know, so whenever you see that at the beginning of a verb, it's just adding intensification or emphasis to that. He's really driven out, okay? Next one. Herr Sekinin fordide that bishoprice at Hovechester, Hove. See, now there's an example where the C is not dotted, but it should be. It should be Hroba with a dotted C. It's between two vowels. Hrovechestra and herkom erst say mikla. Pronounce both. You don't just pronounce it mikla. Mikla. Now this next word is really hard because of all the consonants together. Irfqualm, or excuse me, Irfqualm on Angelkin. This is Angelkin, not Anyelkin. All right. So, anybody want to translate? All right.
Here the king did live with the diocese near Rochester. Yeah, and then the second part was, and here came first the great cattle plague in England.
Right. Very good. So, for did, for meaning away, did, done away, he did away with the, I don't like Marsden's translating the bishopric as diocese. Diocese, for one reason, diocese is Latinate in origin, bishopric is native Old English. Why not just call it bishopric? We still use, some people still use that term, okay? Rochester is pretty clear. The rest of that's fine. So I think one of you hasn't translated yet, and you get a short line. Here, what is that in modern English? I'm going to assume that's also the dotted, should be the dotted C. Here, wetched port west Yehergold, because of the modern translation, modern pronunciation, watch it. So here, what happened? Okay. Or harried also. I've got 537. I know that's not nearly, you know, what you all did. So if you haven't sent me posted your translations, tell you what, rather than posting the I think last week I suggested posting your translations to the discussion board so that everybody else could look at them. Do you guys want to do that, or would you rather just send them to me individually? It doesn't matter to me. If you don't mind everybody else looking at your translations, that's fine with me. Okay, just post them to the discussion board, and I will take a look at all of them. The only problem I'm having with this is how to reply. I'll figure out a way. I might be able to, if you save them as PDFs. I've got one version of Acrobat. I'm pretty sure I can open up and I can mark on things. I don't want to mark on things too much. So go ahead and do that. Send me your, post your translations and I will take a look at them. For next week, okay, next week is just Alfred's preface to the pastoral care, which is going to be a bit more, I believe, than what you've had. Hold on. No, don't post them all. Choose whichever one you think you've done the best on. Let me put it that way. Okay. Yeah. If it's a shorter one, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be real long. If it's Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, it doesn't have to be the entire thing. But I would say send me at least 5 to 10 lines. That gives me enough to be able to look at and go over. So the material next week, Alfred's preface to the pastoral care. It's about 72 lines, 71 lines. Okay. Do it all. For your parsing, I'm going to make a slight change, and I'll send this out also as an email. Do the first 3 full lines, so not 5. Do the first 3 full lines and do nouns, verbs, adjectives, and pronouns. Skip everything else. Okay? So just do nouns, verbs, adjectives, pronouns. Include the title. The Thale spoke, shelter, we are Chestra. So do that in the first 3 lines. Okay? And I'm going to do the same thing and I'll post it. I won't post it before next week because I want to see yours first and then I'll post it. And that way you can use mine to compare against yours. Hopefully, I don't know if you had an opportunity to look at the one I think I posted yesterday, or was it the day before? And I didn't, I mean, I think there were some conjunctions and maybe interjections that I might have skipped, but I tried to do everything else. And I'm also going to send you a simplified key. So don't start it tonight by any means. Start it like, I don't know, tomorrow's Wednesday. Maybe wait till Thursday. Let me send out a revised, much simplified form to kind of follow. Okay, that's all I have. I know it was a lot. Any questions? Any problems? Any different, real kind of troubling difficulties you had in translating these passages? If you have some that you don't want to publicly talk about, shoot me an email. Don't do it, obviously, via the discussion board. But send me an email, and I will try to resolve what I can. All right. That's all. Thank you all. See you next week. Bye-bye.